Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on A Way Home, which is a new coalition organized to support communities across Canada on preventing, reducing, and ending youth homelessness. I'm Stephen Gates. I'm Director of the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness. I'll be presenting today along with Sheldon Pollitt, who is with Choices for Youth in St. John's, Newfoundland. He's the executive director there. And Leslie McMillan, who works with EVA's national initiatives. And together, all of these organizations have been involved in the creation of this new thing we're calling A Way Home. So thank you for joining us. We're going to have lots of time for questions at the end, but to keep them going as we begin. Let's go. Whoops, I have to use my mouse here. Okay, so what we're going to do today is we'll give you an overview of what is A Way Home, but focus a lot on what is the actual work, right? What's going to happen when we put this thing in motion. So we'll go through this and, as I say, ask questions along the way, and we'll hopefully be able to answer everything. If we can't answer it, we'll just make up an answer. So there you go. Okay. So what is A Way Home? Way Home is, as I said, a national coalition dedicated to preventing, reducing, and ending youth homelessness in Canada. And the agenda is fairly broad. We want to put youth homelessness on the agenda of decision makers. Um, we want public spotlight on youth homelessness. We want to align the work of funders and decision makers in government. But the main thing is to support communities in planning and implementing effective strategies to do this work. And so that's where we're at. When we say it's a coalition, we're talking about different kinds of partnerships. The key partners for A Way Home are the national partners that you see on this slide here. Right, so what we've done is we've brought together the national players who have an interest in youth homelessness, including the Canadian Observatory, Canadian Housing Renewal Association, Raising the Roof, of course, who's done a lot through youth works over the years, Canadian Lines to End Homelessness, EGAL Canada, which does a lot of important rights-based work, the National Learning Community on Youth Homelessness, and importantly, the Government of Alberta. So we have different kinds of organizations who are working on homelessness or youth or rights or in government. And so this project is to bring these groups together to collaborate with community-based organizations at the regional and local level to do this important work. We also have funders as partners because we really believe that funders play a key role in this. And the Catherine Donnelly Foundation and Home Depot Canada Foundation have both been really important players in getting this going. Big supporters, and it's about much more than providing funding. Catherine Donnelly Foundation has been key in the design of this and the thinking through how this kind of work is going to work at a national level. And Home Depot of Canada Foundation has also been very supportive and involved in this work. So as we go forward, we're going to want to see that kind of engagement. Funders play a key role because they often are able to support things that are on the cutting edge or outside of the box, which is important because to do this work, we need to be really nimble to be effective. So an important thing to state, though, is that this coalition doesn't come out of nothing. It, in fact, builds on some important work funded by the Catherine Donnelly Foundation called Mobilizing Local Capacity Project. And that project involved working with 2 communities per year to develop and implement plans on youth homelessness. The target was smaller communities in Canada, so less than 200,000 people, and so here's a list of the different ones. You can see they're spread across the country. And what started to become apparent over the last several years is that there's a huge surge in interest and readiness to do this kind of work. Large communities, the Torontos and Edmontons and Ottawas, smaller communities from right across the country. And it became clear that to do this work, we're going to have to do more than pick them off 1 or 2 at a time. We need a broader strategy. We now know more about what to do about youth homelessness in Canada than at any time in history, I would say. So there's a solid knowledge base. Communities are ready to do something and to embed those strategies within their broader homelessness strategies. So the timing is perfect. Not to mention, I think there was an election this week, but that's something else. Okay, the shifting context to get there is really important, right? We've seen across Canada on homelessness writ large, but certainly in the youth homelessness world, that there's a conceptual shift taking hold where we want to move from just managing homelessness to actually preventing it, stopping it from happening in the first place, and ending it. So move young people out of homelessness as quickly as possible. We've had demonstrated success in government and community planning writ large, but also around youth homelessness, both in Canada and the United States. Uh, King County, Seattle, they have a wonderful plan. There's other ones in the U.S. and Canada. Edmonton just released their strategy, their plan on youth homelessness, and it is fantastic, right? So we're seeing lots of movement, and of course the government of Alberta was the first provincial government or higher level of government of any kind in Canada to release a comprehensive strategy on youth homelessness earlier this year. So there's lots going on, and that knowledge base is important because that allows us to build from what people have done, because most plans are going to be similar in many ways, and so we need to learn and share from those successes that exist there. Um, as I said, we have more, the research side, we have greater knowledge about solutions and effective interventions more than we've ever had. That knowledge base is building. That comes from effective strategies in Canada, but also we're learning a lot from other countries like Australia, Ireland, Scotland, United States as well. And so we need to pull that information together, pick it up from the ground so that other communities can adapt those learnings. There is this enhanced community readiness that I spoke about. Communities aren't, it isn't just about capacity, it's about communities having the leadership and the collaboration mechanisms in place to make this move. And the key thing with this project is increasing collaboration by national partners. There's a level of collaboration around youth homelessness here that I don't think we've ever seen in Canada around homelessness writ large, right? And so it's a commitment to work together, to work in new ways, to put aside, the organizational interests to focus on this broader goal of addressing youth homelessness. So let's talk about the role of Away Home. What exactly is Away Home going to do? What's the work? It's one thing to say we're going to end youth homelessness, but we have to actually do something to get there. So this slide here shows the key constellations of activity. This is a way of thinking about the work that Melanie Redmond developed and pushed through in collaboration with the national partners. And a constellation model means that each of these areas has within it another constellation of activities. And with each area, we target what is the work and who does the work. And you will see that the national partners and regional partners and local partners are all going to play leadership roles in each one of these areas. So it's a distributed leadership model. The way that Away Home is going to work that makes it so effective is that it's not going to we're not creating like this big new entity, yet one more national homelessness organization. It actually draws on the strengths and effectiveness of those existing organizations, their skill sets, their resources, their knowledge base. So let's go through these one by one, and we'll talk about what they actually mean. So partnership and collaboration we begin with, and this is really key to all this work. Partnership and collaboration we're talking about not just at the national level, but how do we support communities to enhance the way they work in that collaborative way. And when we're talking about this, in terms of considerations for planning, what we're talking about is a collective impact model. Now, when we say collective impact, we don't just mean let's work together, let's hold hands. Collective impact means something very specific. It means a different way of working together. It means putting aside, as I say, your own organization's interests to work towards a common goal. That common goal may, in fact, impact on your organization in a way that may not seem positive. But we have to do this work in a collaborative way where there's shared responsibility, shared work, shared leadership, but all for the, moving in that direction. There's been a lot of work on this collective impact, and we're working with organizations in Ontario to support communities and ourselves to do this work. It's difficult work. Collaboration and collective impact is not something that is easily done because it means not only doing new things, but it might also mean stopping doing things that you're currently doing. And the key thing is there that you have that common agenda. We have to be able to make sure we know what we're doing and that there's some kind of impact, right? Not just head off down the road and say, trust us. It's all going to work out. We need to be able to measure and determine that something actually changes. It requires continuous communication and collaboration. That's where the difficult work comes in because there's often the sticky bits, as Sheldon would say, that can gum up the works of the machine. So we have to continually talk, work together, and get things done. And then you're going to need some kind of backbone support, right? So we keep a lean organizational structure. We're not going to build this big monster, as I said, but we need, there are backbone functions that are going to be important. You have to have coordination. Collective impact rarely works without some kind of central coordinating role, and the different pieces of getting things done will be shared in many ways. Their backbone functions, not necessarily an organization does it. Many different organizations provide that support. So let's go on to community planning. Here's a key thing, right? Like communities need a plan, but they also need to implement the plan. We're drawing, as I say, on this massive amount of experience on doing community plans to end youth homelessness. The large one in the middle is the Edmonton one, which, as I said, is an amazing one. Everyone should read it. It's amazing not just for the outcome of the plan, but the process that was engaged in around working with community to develop and implement this. Community planning also is we all know this, but planning on its own is not enough. It's the implementation where things get sticky because at the community level, to move from a crisis response to one that focuses on prevention and moving people out of homelessness is going to be disruptive to the work that's currently going on. You're going to find that some things you're going to have to stop doing or do less of in order to do these new things. You might find that some of the things that you've been doing for years, once you start that evaluation process, you might find that, well, maybe that's not the right thing to do anymore, or that maybe it's not as effective as we thought. And so the implementation is where things get sticky, and we have to be mindful to support communities, not just to create plans, but to consider how to implement them in ways that are going to really gain traction. How do we get funders at the table? How do we align the strategies within the sector? How do we engage the unusual suspects? All of these are implementation questions that are going to be really key. So we're going to be providing that kind of support too, right? We're not going to just like walk away. We'll work with communities on planning. We'll work with them on all these different things that are going to be important to ensure long-term viability of the plan. It's a whole new approach, and I think it's quite incredible. We're going to create, and Sheldon's going to be talking about this, a community practice that will help communities learn from each other on all of these areas too. And we'll also be providing ongoing technical support, both on the planning process, but as we'll see also in terms of the programs that you need to actually make prevention happen or to implement housing first for youth, these kinds of things. And as we already have a bunch of resources developed, a number of toolkits, the recently released LGBTQ toolkit, which is amazing. But we have planning resources. We're going to develop a youth homelessness community planning framework document. We have Dr. Alina Turner working on that with communities that have done this work because, as I said, most community plans, there's a lot of similarities. This will reduce the need to hire expensive consultants to do work the community. You still may need a consultant, but you'll be miles ahead with a framework that will allow you to do this work more quickly, more effectively. So there's a number of resources we're developing and have developed that are going to really support this. So government relations, this is a key thing. Government relations are going to be crucial to making this happen because as good as communities can do on planning, you are going to hit the ceiling at some point where the changes you want to have happen are the responsibility of a higher level of government. If you find that there's a major flow of young people from leaving child protection into your sector, you're going to have a tough time turning that ship around if you don't have the province at the table in a conversation about what do we do about young people leaving care? How do we do that more effectively? Or young people leaving corrections, another example. So government engagement is important. Um, and we have David French, who's going to be, playing a leadership role in that. David French from the government of Alberta, who has all this expertise and has a really good sense of what role the community can play. Because we'll never solve youth homelessness if it's just communities struggling one at a time. We'll never solve youth homelessness if it's a provincial or federal government that tells communities what to do. We actually need some kind of synergy and effort between the two. So the communities need to work together, and in Alberta or Ontario or wherever, to figure out what it is they need from the province to support their work, or from the federal government, and then work with those higher levels of government to put in place policy, legislation, funding arrangements, program models that are going to support the work of the communities. And that's a key piece of work. It's an exciting piece of work. We have other players from the province of Ontario that will be participating in this potentially, and so it's very exciting. This is where we're going to make progress more quickly, is if we have that interaction between community and government. Program models. What are the programs? It's one thing to say, we need to prevent youth homelessness, stop it from happening in the first place. But if you say, well, okay, let's prevent it, what does that look like? We need to adapt those key program models. And so we've already started work on this, and we're going to make available resources and technical support to help communities implement these. And so here's another example of how collective impact works. Raising the Roof is working on what's called the Upstream Project, which is taking models of youth homelessness prevention from Australia, where they work really effectively within schools, taking those and adapting them so that they can be developed and implemented in Canada. And we're working with the people in Australia on this project. And so it's a collaboration between Raising the Roof, Away Home, and the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, as well as with our Australian partners. And so that's an example of the kind of support. The Family Reconnect work that was pioneered by EVAs in Toronto and taken up and expanded by Boys and Girls Club of Calgary. How do we take that knowledge and allow other communities to implement it? All these things, the youth exiting care, addressing the needs of young people involved in the criminal justice system. We need to develop the resources and program models that communities can take, not take off the shelf, but look at, understand, adapt to the local context and implement. And that includes models of housing and support, jobs and education. We've already developed a toolkit based on Train for Trades, the wonderful program from Choices for Youth in St. John's, Newfoundland, Housing First for Youth, these kind of things. So we need to continue to develop these resources, but more than that, ensure that there's technical support for planning and implementing these locally. Public engagement. How do we tell the story of youth homelessness and what needs to be done? This means we need to figure out tools, communication strategies, resources to do this work at the national, regional, and local level. And so one of the ideas we have down the road is to develop a toolkit for communities around mobilizing the knowledge about youth homelessness in their community to tell the story. Because in many communities, people don't think it's an issue or aren't even aware that there are any homeless youth there. Many people think it's just a downtown big city problem. But of course, we do know that youth homelessness always is a problem that emerges in every community. The drivers of youth homelessness exist in the small towns and rural areas of this country as much as they do in the big cities. And so again, we'll be drawing on expertise. Raising the Roof has a massive amount of experience on public relations. Other organizations that we're involved with do as well. So we'll be doing that kind of work. So, and as I say, develop communication strategies that communities can use and implement. The research piece. This is a good example of why the coalition model works as well, right? So Away Home is not going to create its own research department. Why would you do that, right? Instead, it will collaborate with the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, and other researchers to do the research that's needed. In fact, leading up to this, between the National Learning Community on Youth Homelessness and the Observatory, we've developed and are implementing a very comprehensive youth homelessness research agenda. We co-created it so people in the community and in government had a say, and as did the researchers. And one of the outcomes is that this week, right now, as we speak, um, we're actually implementing our national youth homelessness survey that involves over 90 organizations across the country. We had researchers working with the community to figure out what are the questions we need. And the knowledge that's going to be generated from that is going to allow us to paint a very comprehensive picture on youth homelessness in Canada. We've never had a research study like this before. But for communities, what's going to be amazing is that for those that are participating, they can compare their local data to the national picture. And in doing that, they'll be able to achieve a couple of things. One is it'll feed into the planning process. Do they have more young women in their shelters than other communities? Or is Aboriginal homelessness even a bigger problem in your community? Mental health and addictions, is it particularly problematic where you live? So it'll help for planning because we'll have good information and a baseline to work from in terms of measuring progress. But it will also give communities the opportunity to tell that story of youth homelessness locally. Again, as part of that public engagement strategy, the research knowledge becomes particularly important. So that research agenda, which is in play right now, will continue to be developed, and it's done with partners, and is going to lead to really important outcomes. The research project that I was just talking about was funded by Home Depot of Canada Foundation, and so again, another example of partnership. Like, how do we get this job done? We can't do it with a single organization. I don't think we want to do it as a single organization. This is where collective impact really shines through. It's how we work collaboratively. We can go much farther, much faster, in a smarter, more comprehensive way if we learn to work together effectively. So, oh yes, this is the National Youth Homelessness Research Agenda. That's one of the researchers at the Homeless Hub concocting solutions to youth homelessness as we speak. That's the live feed from our laboratory at York University. Okay, I'm going to now hand this over, the next two sections, to the partners who are co-presenting here. The next sections, I'll just flip this slide back, youth voice, youth engagement, that is, and community of practice. So we're going to start with Leslie McMillan. I'm going to hand this over to you, Leslie. There you are.
Hi, Steve.
Hey, how are you doing? And so, Leslie, I'm really looking forward to your comments. Your knowledge and experience in this area is amazing, and the work you've done most recently on LGBTQ youth is a model of how to get this kind of work done and how to engage young people. So I'll hand it over to you now.
Well, I wasn't feeling much pressure until now. If Steve Gates thinks you're doing good work, that's awesome. One of the things that Away Home is really focusing on is youth voice. Plans to end youth homelessness in Canada require the voices of young people who have lived experience. Youth with experience know what supports are necessary and how the existing systems have failed them. And youth are our key partners in the work of Away Home. So one of the first areas of work, obviously, is to figure out how we can engage youth in the work of Away Home in a meaningful way as full partners. So it's more than just, hey, let's have a focus group and hear what you're saying, but bringing youth to the table as full partners and informants on the change that needs to happen. One of our goals is to, as I said, is to identify what those promising practices are and to develop tools that not only can we use in Canada, but we can also share with our international partners and also bring resources to communities as they're creating their local plans. And Steve alluded to an upcoming youth engagement toolkit that it's different than regular youth engagement. It's not about engaging youth in your programs, but more about bringing youth to the table when you're developing your community plan. So how do you go about bringing youth So that way it's not just a token effort, well, let's hear from the young people now, but more a matter of equal partners in that work. And so this resource should be coming out shortly, so keep your eye out for it. I know the amazing folks at the Canadian Observatory and the other national partners in A Way Home will help get word out about it. And actually, partnerships are critical for creating youth-led engagement activities that guide A Way Home in our efforts to end youth homelessness. This is one of the many strengths of the coalition model that's been developed, where youth engagement, although there is a coalition, there is a constellation called Youth Voice, youth engagement will be throughout the other constellations. And as the work develops and key stakeholders are identified, we'll be able to bring these groups into the work. So we'll be able to focus in on what local work is happening in the local communities and figuring a way to bring them into the national work. One of the areas that A Way Home is focusing on is the LGBTQ2S, so lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, and two-spirit youth. We often state, when we're talking about youth homelessness, we'll often state that between 20 and 40% of youth experiencing homelessness identify as LGBTQ2S. This number is too huge, as in the general population, that number is around 5 to 10%. So A Way Home is dedicated to having this issue as a core component of our work, and to ensure that we always have this as part of our work. LGBTQ2S youth is included in each constellation of work. So it's not just off on its own, you know, let's figure this out. It's a key part of the whole thing. So the research constellation, you know, that's going to be on their work plan. On public engagement, that'll be on that work plan. And obviously for the community practice, that'll be on that work plan as well. As Steve mentioned this past spring, the National Learning Community on Youth Homelessness, or Learning Community for short, I guess, developed an online toolkit that provides training and tools for staff and organizations to better support queer and trans youth who access our programs and services. In this process, the Learning Community identified key organizations and networks in Canada and the United States that are doing such awesome work. And part of the coalition, the A Way Home, is to continue to work with these groups and to bring them into the work as we look for solutions to end homelessness, youth homelessness in Canada. And one of the things we're doing next week, we're convening the first United States-Canada meeting, kind of meeting of the minds, to begin working with our partners in the United States to collaborate on tools and resources to support the work of reducing the number of LGBTQ2S youth experiencing homelessness, to bring that number from 40% down to none. And that meeting is also going to be with the True Colors Fund. We're bringing in Learning Community members and the folks at EGAL Canada to really start that conversation, and then figuring out what does that look like. Then it's a matter of going back out to the community as a whole and say who else wants to be involved in this work. So this work will create a template for the work that focuses on other youth that are also, other groups of youth that are also overrepresented in the youth homelessness population. So there's a lot of learning, and I think that's the great thing about the A Way Home model is that it's about results, but it's also about learning and sharing that learning and that knowledge mobilization. And I'm looking forward to hearing Sheldon's presentation next. Sheldon.
Thank you, Leslie. I'm here. Delayed. I got to turn on my. Well, here I am. Just want to say thank you to Steve and Leslie for that wonderful presentation. So, my part of it is talking about a community practice, and I guess you know, one of the things that has always been very key to us is this sense of you know, community working in isolation. Hold on, I got to find the right slide here. All right, there you go. So, you know, as a founding member of the learning community going back, you know, almost 10 years now, I guess the roots were born out of this sense of many of us at an organizational level even were working in isolation and really, you know, in a sense, trying to reinvent the wheel, organization by organization, and knowing at the same time that there were a lot of other people in the country doing the exact same thing. So it started really with very real expectations around how can we come together, how can we share knowledge, how can we just at least do that level of sharing and improve service delivery to the young people we were working with. So, I won't go through 10 years of history, but, we're at a stage now where, as a key component of the coalition, is the evolution of what we're now referring to as community of practice, that the learning community itself is the foundational, I guess, group or approach that really formalizes that as an important part of the coalition, that we can get a lot further ahead in this country around knowledge mobilization in a number of different areas by sharing our what we can learn from each other, our experiences, and the information that we have at our fingertips around what's needed in our communities, and to a much greater impact. Hold on. So breaking down silos. I mean, I think many of us working in communities where often we look at government, for example, and think government entities and agencies work in silos. Communities themselves can sometimes reflect this as well. So really, it's a process of coming together, breaking down those silos, looking at, as Steve referenced, ways that we can collaborate and work together. Even at a national organizational level, then. There have been a number of national organizations working in and around, obviously, issues of housing and homelessness for many years, doing great work. But I guess some light bulb moments over the last few years in particular, using the experience of the learning community and other work, that none of those entities in and of themselves had the resources and the capacity to end youth homelessness all on their own. That we'd be much better served by harnessing and collaborating around a better use of that focus and that energy and those resources. So that's a key aspect of this community of practice, is that we want to maintain, as much as we're now aiming at, certainly provincial and national level policy change and a lot of the systemic change that we need to end youth homelessness, that we want to maintain that sense of shared learning and community practice at the same time, because there are still many communities who are maybe at an earlier stage of the process around either developing or implementing plans or enhancing services in their community for at-risk and vulnerable youth, that we want to keep operating in that area as well. Again, keeping with that theme is, and then making national connections. Again, based on the experience of 10 years of really successful collaboration at a learning community level, that there are other previously unthought of partners in the country at a national level who have a role to play in ending youth homelessness. One of the more recent partners to the national coalition work is EGAL Canada, and as Leslie just appropriately pointed out, is that the experience of LGBTQ2S youth speaks volumes to the importance of having a group like EGAL Canada directly involved in the coalition if we're going to succeed in addressing the needs of all populations of homeless youth that are out there. So again, it really, making national connections starts obviously with the likely suspects, but as we grow and develop and hopefully bring in more partners, it's then we reaching out in through the unlikely partners as well. So moving on from there, really talking about knowledge mobilization, operating basically at an organizational level, up to a community level. Now, maybe we can achieve some of these things at a provincial level and then up to a national level. So sort of like a snowball effect of success in terms of knowledge mobilization and implementation, up to a greater and greater impact as we move along. And the reason why I describe it as a deliberate process, knowledge mobilization, and the question around best practice is, best practice for far too long, in my view, has focused on the creation of and identification of best practice, but there wasn't a lot of investment in the now what. What do you do with it once you create it? Because organizations, communities don't necessarily have the resources or capacity to actually take a best practice document and turn it into a living, breathing opportunity for people. So it's very much that two-step process: identify best practice, identify toolkits, identify the work that needs to be done, and then having a very focused way to make sure that communities get to implement the results of all that work. And Steve and the work that others have done, even from, say, the Canadian Observatory, are probably the the highest level standard around what can be achieved when you focus on knowledge mobilization. Hold on. Okay, so how does this translate into something meaningful? What you're seeing then is capacity that has been, I think, at our fingertips for many, many years. As Steve appropriately pointed out, for example, in my case, I've been with this organization doing this work for 15 years, and I can honestly say in the beginning, it really was a sense of we really don't have a handle on what the big ticket solutions around youth homelessness is going to be. I'm glad to say that after 15 years we have a huge level of knowledge around what's required in this country. But the key to unlocking that knowledge is unlocking all this capacity. You're talking about youth voice, local and national organization, communities coming together, governments and researchers, all in a much more focused way, collaborative, sharing the resources, sharing the work, and sharing the responsibility, quite frankly. And I think, how that, success in that area is a measure of, as the slide suggests, local knowledge informing national work, but the same's got to be true in reverse, that national knowledge is supporting local work as well. Is that the impact of both sides of that coin are real and tangible for groups across the country. So with all that said, I guess we're on to the questions and comment section.
And just so people know, next Thursday, a week from now, we're going to actually officially launch Away Home. We're doing that in Ottawa, to be followed the next day by a community planning institute in Ottawa to support their efforts to address youth homelessness. So if people have any questions, please send them in, and the three of us will do our best to answer them. In the meantime, I'm having some tea. And it is tea, Sheldon.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
So while we're waiting, Sheldon, I'm just going to ask you, as somebody who's been involved in this work for a long time, what's your sense about what we're proposing here in terms of its ability to really move the yardsticks?
Well, I know for my community, for example, one of the things I guess we came to the realization a long time ago is we can be an adaptive, innovative organization. We can learn. We can bring people from other parts of the country to really raise up the program and opportunities that we're providing for young people. But I guess the penny dropped is, but I don't have control over the systems that see young people repeatedly fall into homelessness in the first place. So how do you address that then? So working with national partners, again, that's that local work informing national approaches, national work impacting on local work as well, is that we're seeing, a greater level of dialogue and hopefully commitment around, a provincial plan to end youth homelessness. That's something that would not have happened, I think, and certainly wouldn't have happened as quickly if not for the work in and around, not just creating the coalition, but the true purpose is creating a consistent approach across the country to the solutions required to end youth homelessness.
Great. That's really helpful. I think you're right. It's like, how do we go to scale on this?
Yeah.
I'm going to take a few of these questions here that are coming up now. One is, can you describe Away Home's funding structure, how each of you is funded? So here's the organizational structure and the funding structure. Away Home itself will have a very lean team. 3 staff members who will be responsible for uh, coordinating and organizing the work. You have to have that coordination role. Staff with expertise around community planning and uh, community engagement, that kind of thing. So it's a lean team. That funding, so we need some core funding for that and for the overhead of the organization. But the participating organizations are doing their work not in a paid consultant way. We're doing it as part of our role, right? So the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness is not receiving funding from um, Away Home to engage on the research side. We will work collaboratively where possible. I'm using this as an example. We'll work collaboratively where possible to fund the pieces of work that need to be done to identify new funding. But there's a lot of in-kind contributions here by all the national players who are basically seeing it as part of their work, and that we can do more by collaborating together. So the backbone functions would be just the overhead thing, the accounting, space, that kind of thing, and we will need funding to support some of the planning processes and that kind of thing that the staff will be doing, that kind of thing. But in the at the community level, what it's going to mean is that we're going to help communities get their funding together too to do this kind of planning and implementation work. Some communities can develop that and use it internally. A municipality can contribute. Others will go to the United Way. It depends on how they're going to structure. But there do need to be resources to do the planning, coordination, and implementation. So again, Way Home is going to be a very lean operation that's going to rely on the collaboration and input from all the partners. Um, so I hope that answers that. Kate says, has there been an educational component in screen just went down, so I have to find that question.
It says here in Victoria, BC, we see tenant education making a difference.
Okay, here. Oh, yes. Well, that will be there. When we think about education, there's lots of different levels, right? There's like public education. There's educating the sector on how to think differently about responding to youth homelessness, and there's certainly the idea that we want to support young people. And education means many different things, right? It means life skills, and I think the tenant education model that you've developed would fit into that. So there, for young people, and Sheldon, maybe you can talk about that. But there's also the key thing: if we really want to make a bang for our buck in terms of addressing youth homelessness in the long term and ensuring young people don't become chronically homeless adults, we have to also help young people get to school, right? Get their education, because the dropout rate in Canada, while it's 9% in Canada, it's over 65% amongst homeless youth. So we have to do more than just house people. We have to help them get back to school. Anybody want to add anything on that?
Sheldon here. Just one of the things, certainly well aware of, the sector itself, certainly can't provide all the supportive housing options that, this huge number of young people across the country would need. So I would suspect, engaging in, with the landlord community, if you want to use that language, is huge and key, in this process. And I know there's some local work by some agencies around that. The city actually, our municipality is actually on board now, looking at convening sessions with, large, portions of the landlord community to actually help do, some of that landlord education work as well. So it absolutely is key.
Right. I think that's a really good example. The national study on youth homelessness. So that's being carried out this week and may flow into next week. Again, we have like 90-something organizations who are all conducting the same survey with young people in their communities. We're going to have a very large data set, so all those surveys that are anonymized, in other words, the young person's name isn't attached to it, will be sent to us here at York University, where we'll enter the data, analyze the data, and then in the new year, we'll be releasing a national report and giving communities back a summary report of their own data. That will all be made available for free to the general public, whoever's interested at that time. And we'll also, because it's such an amazing data set, we'll also down the road be releasing different kinds of reports on more narrow issues within it. Everything from family issues that will help communities around the Family Reconnect work, or addictions issues, or mental health, employment, education needs, all these kind of things. We'll be able to generate reports for a long time, and our plan is probably once we get the data sorted out and do our first report, we'll want to open it up so that researchers from elsewhere can also analyze the data. We'll have like an open data policy.
Steve, can you just let people know about the Community Foundation role in this too, and the dissemination piece and that exciting partnership?
Oh, that's good.
Happening
That's
there.
good. That's right. We've been doing a lot of work approaching community foundations across the country in this work, but also at the national level, to both support the actual carrying out of the research, but also to incorporate the findings in the work that they do, particularly those communities that are doing vital signs reports. So many communities are very excited to have the opportunity to talk about youth homelessness. So that'll be a big public education outcome of this work, again, to raise awareness of youth homelessness, to shift the public's thinking about both the existence of youth homelessness as a problem, but also for those who think people are leaving homes for frivolous reasons, this will be really solid data that will show a lot about the causes of youth homelessness. Okay, a couple of other questions here. What role will the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness have? They've been very positive in supporting this work all along with their national conference the last 2 years. There is a big portion of the conference that's devoted to youth homelessness. That work has been coordinated by the people at the National Learning Community on Youth Homelessness and the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness as well. They are committed to the work. Our work aligns with their agenda, which is to prevent and reduce and end homelessness, to focus on housing first. There is a good connection there, and we hope to collaborate in the future on this kind of thing as well.
And I think part of the support on that is the acknowledgement that if we can end youth homelessness, then we can prevent adult homelessness, right? So there is a really great connection there.
Yeah, I think that's really worth pointing out. I'm glad you raised that, Leslie, because...
Thank you.
A very good point. Because, one of the things we're learning more about is that there is that flow through from youth homelessness to adult homelessness. The At-Home Chiswa study demonstrated some of that. We've done some research that demonstrates that many of the chronic homeless adults that we see in the streets now, their pathway into homelessness began when they were teenagers. Again, in the At-Home Chiswa project, a very high percentage of the adult homeless population, the chronically homeless adult population, were in child protection at some point. And so there's an absolute connection. So if we take seriously the objective of ending chronic homelessness, then the best preventive strategy, or one of the best preventive strategies we can engage in, is to take seriously youth homelessness. There's a question about what does Sheldon from Big Bang have to do with this? Well, we like Sheldons as a rule, and so... but I couldn't convince Sheldon to put that shirt on yet, but we'll get that. Another question is about the resources created with Lena Turner. We're starting that work this fall, and I'm guessing that we'll have something to show in the new year, early in the new year. I'm pausing because I don't know the exact timeline, but I do know this. Alina works very quickly, and she drinks a lot of coffee, so put those together, and we can be very optimistic. It's going to be really good, and it will be made available, and it too will be made available for free to everyone. Does anyone, how can the average person support the efforts at the community level? Anybody want to take that? I have some thoughts on it, but I don't want to be the
Well,
only one?
well,
Leslie?
I think I think the easiest way is to just engage with us in the beginning on social media. So we have a Facebook group, a Facebook page. We also have a Twitter feed. So connect with us that way to stay in touch. And I mean, there's right now, like we're just getting ready to launch Away Home. So there's so many things that we need to do kind of in the next few months. But as we get more into the work and we kind of get the constellations working, we'll have a better idea of that. We'll definitely be able to share that out. And using the amazing national partners that are involved with Away Home, it'll be hard to miss that update. So just keep watching for now. Give us a bit of time to get sorted and stay in touch. Sheldon, do you have any?
Yeah, the piece for me, and I did an interview with Alina last week, I guess, looking into the toolkit creation for the community planning piece. And, having gone through a lot of this process ourselves and basically figuring it out out of just sheer instinct and experience at this point, how do you lift out the pieces of that are transferable to other communities? And one of the pieces I always think about is, each community needs to kind of assess its own capacity, because not all communities are created equal. They're not in all the same place in all areas of this work. So if you can find a way to be a part of that conversation around what's happening in your community, either at an organizational level around youth homelessness, and if there's a larger community level conversation happening, how to get involved in it. If it's not happening, how you can actually conceive of pulling together some people to get it happening. And that's not a criticism of those communities where it's not happening, is that's part of the work, is figuring out where you are so that you can actually join this effort, I guess, again, starting, like I said, that roll up from organizational to community to province. And so where are you on that kind of timeline? So for people out there who are inclined to be a part of the solution, is just find out where you plug into that.
Yeah, I agree, Sheldon. I think that the real opportunity to work locally is to get involved, raise awareness, support the work, and let people know that youth homelessness is a problem in your community, whether people think it is or not, but also that we can address the problem. We know what to do. We know what to do, and that there are supports and resources available for communities who want to move forward. So starting to build the movement locally, getting involved, uh, identifying local leadership, starting to build bridges between organizations within the sector and outside. That kind of work's really important. Telling the story of youth homelessness. So there's a lot for community people to do. We're creating an organizational structure for Away Home that's going to allow communities, individuals, organizations to participate in this work in many ways. Again, our approach is to make everything available, support people to do that work locally, because it won't happen nationally until it happens locally too. Okay, let's see. Oh, the question about companion animals and homeless youth. Are any animal welfare organizations being considered as key partners? We haven't, to be honest, I don't think we've explored that yet, but the whole idea behind this coalition model is that if there are organizations that are aligned with what we want to do and are going to be supportive and are doing good work, then we want to work with you. What this will not be is an exclusive club, right? We want the people who are committed to the goal of preventing, reducing, and ending youth homelessness, and so people who understand the role of animals for any human, but for certainly young people, that seems to be something that we would explore. Anybody else want to weigh in?
Well, I agree with you, Steve, that it's not meant to be an exclusive club, and I think part of the work, and it's I think the wonderful part of it is we can't even conceive of all the partnerships that need to be at the table or could be at the table. Yeah. The one I think of, which is a bit of a no-brainer for me, is the whole issue of poverty, across the board. Yeah. I guess so. At what point do we look at who are the national partners that we want to engage with, just about just pure poverty level issues, food security? There's all kinds of things that we can see as being, an overlap with the work of the Coalition to End Youth Homelessness. And the nice thing about that is you picture this layer of overlap on overlap on overlap. None of that national work, for example, in terms of the Canadian Alliance, I think someone had a question. Like, the Canadian Alliance doesn't have to change its mission, mandate, vision of what it's trying to do.
Right.
What it simply has to do is figure out that, this piece over here, it's a part of our larger mandate, and we are happy to partner around that specific piece while continuing to do meet the rest of our mandate. So as we look at, approaching other national organizations or other national organizations trying to figure out how they plug in with us, as long as we can sit across one another and say, okay, here's where we can see an obvious overlap in our work, well, then the rest is details. We can figure it out from there.
Yeah. I think, or here's a question from a retired secondary school teacher about how to get involved and volunteer. I would say just locally, like, find out who's out there. And, your community may or may not have organizations that have an explicit mandate to work with young people who are homeless, but they most likely will have some kind of youth-based organizations. Approach them, find out if they take volunteers and how you might get involved. And I think that's important work, fulfilling work, and certainly somebody who's an educator. There's lots of work to do to help young people engage with learning in all kinds of ways.
Two examples I can give of the role of the educational system. One is really a youth-led. There was an amazing summit here last year of pretty much all the high schools across the province gathered for a mental health and addiction summit. Youth-led, youth-driven, youth voice. It was amazing, and our youth plugged into that. So it's one example of how the educational system can play a huge role in just letting young people do what they can do. The other example I can give in terms of, Susan Rose is a retired educator here in the province who's made it pretty much her personal mission to, speak out for the needs of the LGBTQ2S community here in Newfoundland around some of these issues. So those are just examples, but whether you're an educator or a professional of how can your personal passion and or skills combine, and you can offer them up in whatever makes sense for you.
There's a question here by someone named David French, and this is a really good question. How could and should people at the local level make their own governments aware of a way home and the breadth of support available to shift this work? This is an excellent question. I think one of the challenges or problems in the past is that the task of solving youth homelessness has basically been dumped in the laps of the charitable sector, of the nonprofit sector. And so organizations have been doing great work across Canada. Some communities don't have these organizations, but we will never, ever, ever solve youth homelessness if the entire task is left on the laps of community-based organizations, because the drivers of homelessness, those are things controlled by higher levels of government, right? Sheldon talked about poverty, all these different factors that contribute to youth homelessness having to do with education, child protection, child welfare, violence against children, income supports, all of these things are things, health, mental health, addictions, involvement with the law, all of these things involve higher levels of government. And so if we're going to move the yardsticks, it doesn't matter what province or territory you're in, you're going to need those higher levels of government, including the government of Canada, at the table doing their fair share. So as local community member, work as individuals, work as organizations, work as community groups, let the politicians know that we need the province at the table. We have to stop this idea that the problem is just going to go away or that we can't do anything about it, because we know we can, but we do need government at the table to support this work. Anybody want to add anything to that?
No, I think you got that one, Steve.
Bam! But that's a good question, right? Like, it's the key, and the province of Alberta has led the way in this country by showing what role a province can play, right? And taking a very deliberate action, money on the table, programming, planning, a model that focuses on prevention. It's an excellent example, but I think all of us on this panel here would agree that one of the successes that we'll say as a country is when every province and territory has a youth homelessness strategy, and that the government of Canada has one as well.
Yeah.
So, we need that to happen, and the surest way to make government move on that is when constituents, when the voting public gets out there and demands that they do it.
Yeah. And one of the things I think from an approach perspective is, we as a community, we're not just standing in the corner pointing the finger at, whether it's provincial or federal governments about what they are or not doing. Obviously, we've got to be honest with, folks about parts of the system that need adjustment, but this really does have to be collaborative in terms of how we approach it, how we think about solutions, how we engage in conversation around what those things are.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Sheldon, because it isn't a case of, pointing fingers, right? Like, that won't get us anywhere. I think people in government understand where a lot of the problems are. But if the public starts making demands, then we'll see some action. So you're right, and it's got to be collaborative. As I was saying earlier with the model of engaging government, government has a role. Communities have to help government understand and define what that role is. Government needs support in thinking that through, and so communities are going to be playing an important role. It's going to require an investment. We can't pretend it's going to be free, but here's the thing. You're going to pay now or you're going to pay later, and that's a message for government as well. By neglecting the problem, we're actually investing in lifelong financial commitments to young people who won't be able to get jobs, who will be in trouble with the law, and may have health and addictions issues because we didn't do the right thing at the right time.
A couple other things on that, Steve, is, well aware that this is long-term work.
Yeah.
And, certainly elections are important key points of getting it on the political agenda and those sorts of things as well. But this is long-term sustainable work if we're going to achieve our goals around, A, creating plans and then delivering on those plans.
That's right, and there's a whole new bunch of MPs elected, I understand, across this country. Might want to start dropping them a line about this issue as well. That's not lobbying, by the way. That's just a comment. There's a question here about York sharing the national survey questions. Absolutely. We haven't done that yet, I don't believe, partly because we didn't finalize them until about a week ago, but we'll make sure that those are made available. We'll create a site that has some of that stuff, but if anybody's wants to see it sooner rather than later, we can send it to you if you just send us an email and request it. Who or what organizations are conducting the national survey in Ontario? I can't tell you offhand. We have 91 nationally, so I'm suspecting probably a third of them are in Ontario, just based on population, but I could be wrong. I know in Toronto there are 7 different organizations involved in the work. In Ottawa, I think there are 2 or 3, but I can't give you detail on that. We'll make all of that available as well.
On that note, Steve, I just got an email from one of my staff that's saying the surveys are going exceptionally well.
Oh, good. Good. Vote once and vote often. No, don't pass that on. No, that's good. That's good. This project is actually a real example of how to work collaboratively, right? Because it's the organizations like Sheldon's who have enough to do during their day anyway are devoting their time and resources to help get the survey out to young people. So, getting researchers to work with communities in this way, we couldn't have done this 10 years ago very easily, or even 5 years ago. So, but this is kind of work we can do nationally now that's going to support people. Oh, here's a question. Do you have a list of advocacy points we can use? Yes, we have key messages, and Oksana, I'm going to ask you, I think we're creating as well a list of potential tweets and things like that that people can rework and use, once we launch this next Thursday, the 29th of October. Circle that in your calendar. So we'll, just email us if you want some of that. We're trying to distribute those through our networks anyway, but we certainly don't aren't plugged into everybody, but we'd be glad to share with you the key messages as well. If you go to the website, and I see Oksana has the Facebook group there. The website for Away Home is www.awayhome.ca, and so there's a lot of information there about the Away Home project. Okay, waiting now for some other points. So, Leslie, I have a question for you. I love I love the toolkit that you developed, and in fact, I teaching a class of people who want to be teachers, um, uh, and so the class is on adolescence and adolescent development, and I showed them the website and I want them to use it and
Yeah.
apply those learnings in schools about how to work at a policy,
Oh,
practice,
cool.
and training level. Have you,
Mhm.
what kind of feedback have you received on that kind of resource? Like, is that the kind of thing people are wanting?
Yeah, I think, folks are, it's really hard to find a curated resource. I mean, the toolkit that we created is really focused on, when you get into the training modules, it's about what should the intake process look like for LGBTQ2S youth to feel comfortable, supported, and respected during the intake. But there's a lot of that, although it's talking about intake into a shelter system. It's transferable, right? You take out, shelter and put in program, or you put in, into school. You can change that, and the core components there and the feedback from youth was really important. And I think we've been getting good feedback on the toolkit, and I think part of it is because we spent a lot of time getting youth with lived experience to tell us how we can make it better for them. So it wasn't, just reading. There's a lot of it that was research and working with Dr. Alex Abramovich and other folks like the True Colors Fund in the States and looking at the work, again, of EGAL Canada. There's a lot of that research piece, but I was also talking with youth about how can we make it better now for you. So we did 4 focus groups. One was here in Toronto. We did one in Guelph, Ottawa, and in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and really got the feedback from the youth. So that, I think, is important because you're getting that first voice in terms of this is how we need it to be. But for schools, there's a lot of it that's transferable, and it would be great to connect with educators, because then we do need to have a module on education. And how can schools, teachers, and other students be allies for queer and trans youth to make that space safe enough for LGBTQ2S youth to live authentic lives. So there is, and that's the thing about the toolkit. Sorry, I'm kind of rambling on about it. But it is a living resource. It's not done. I think the only time we can say it's been completed is when we've gone from the 40 to none, right? When we've ended youth homelessness, that's when that project is done. And there's that commitment from the national learning community to make it a living document. So yeah, I definitely would love to connect with educators and soon-to-be educators to get their feedback and to develop that piece out more. So please send them my email address.
Oh, great. I'm going to do that
Or
while we
bring me to
speak.
York.
Um, I want to read a comment from David French. I love this, actually. He's saying, don't focus so much on advocacy points, right? That there's something else. I think your point, David, is that if we just think about advocacy, it's just asking government to do something, pointing the finger at someone else. I'm just going to read some of the things you said here. Please share your successes. All that innovation that happens at the community level, we need to be better at sharing. That's where Sheldon, the community of practice and the public awareness piece is going to be so key. Prioritize collaboration, yes, both within and outside your organization. That collective impact approach, I would really suggest people have a look at how that works. Collaboration is the only way, and seeking opportunities to involve government with your work, right?
Yeah.
Like not just asking them, but how do you do that? And again, the Alberta model is that it was really a ground up. I'm speaking for you, David. I hope you don't mind, but it really was a ground up approach where the communities were doing lots of innovative work, and we're learning to collaborate really effectively across the 7 cities. and then they came to the government and said, you know what, we need to collaborate with you if we're going to go to the next level. And so that's an excellent example, right? But really look at what you can do in your community to get things going, right? This is a problem that can be solved everywhere. So start to get busy, learn from other people, tap into the national learning community, find the resources, find the people who are leaders, and engage young people, right? And that's a key thing of the work that we're going to do is that, you know what, the really good idea is if you want a real good solution, ask a young person who's had to deal with systems and struggle with organizations and has not had the support they need. So really do that. One other thing about communities I want to point out, which I was going to mention before but I didn't, is that there's a campaign called Push for Change, which is going to work its way across Canada to engage communities around the issue of youth homelessness, focusing on prevention and moving young people out of homelessness. So that's going to help communities pull people together to talk about the issue and to do something. And so, you know, there's so much happening now that's very exciting that is all kind of intersecting and but again, at the end of the day, as David says, collaborate, work together. That's how we're going to move things. Nobody can solve this by themselves. No organization can.
Two things I guess that triggers for me, Steve, is one, and I, again, in the interview with Alina around the toolkit around some of the stuff I talked about is what are the natural avenues in terms of, working with government. I mean, here, for example, we've just had a series of consultations around crime and community safety, health, primary health care, mental health and addictions, poverty. So, government is looking for ideas and kind of addressing, what are the burning issues in all of these areas. So those are your natural avenues to provide information, right? And advocacy is one thing, and certainly people are welcome to do that piece too, but it's providing information in all of those venues. So, I mean, through our work, and I guess just trying to use it as a bit of a living example as part of this webinar, is we now have a consistent document that we put in all of those spaces.
Yep.
You want to address crime and community safety from a youth perspective, address youth homelessness. You want to, address, mental health and addiction, systemic change in this province, youth homelessness. Because one of the things, over time we're beginning to realize is that when they go through all these consultations, all the same issues and priorities come up. But they're very siloed in terms of, okay, now the health department's going to go try and figure that out, and the justice system's going to go try to figure that out. So how do you, think strategically around those are the natural access points to provide government with not only identifying issues, but real solutions. And I think that's an opportunity. Separate from that, I think part of the process as your community comes together, begins to mobilize and figure out, assess where it's at, is there may also be some opportunities you may need to manufacture, and you got to be very thoughtful and deliberate in terms of how you manufacture those opportunities. Switching over to the youth side of it, I think, for our own organization and a lot of youth voice work happening across the country, I think this is huge untapped potential in terms of linking it all up, is what responsibility, do we have to train and support youth in using their voice in the most powerful way possible. The other piece for me, and I remember a story back years and years ago, looking at one particular young woman who is simply brilliant and was engaging in using her voice, in many wonderful ways. And I remember looking at her and I said, promise yourself something. Don't be a 30-year-old former at-risk youth. Make sure you get something out of this process as well, in terms of credentials, resumes, skills. And we owe it to young people. If we're going to ask them to support this work in using their youth voice, we've got to, meaningfully contribute to their capacity to do that, and where they go on from there in their own lives in the future. So I think that's just a key piece for me around the youth voice as well.
Yeah, that's very well put. We have a question here from Peter. Hey, how are you doing? This is a question around meaningful partnerships with First Nations and Indigenous youth and communities at the national, regional, local level. This is an important piece of work that we absolutely recognize. We're going to need to be really effective at. I don't think we can talk about homelessness in Canada without talking about Aboriginal homelessness, because Aboriginal people are overrepresented in homeless populations right across the country due to our history of colonialism and ongoing racism. So we need to do this work in a way that is one that is Aboriginal-led. When we talk about higher levels of government, that includes Aboriginal governments. We need that engagement with Aboriginal youth, and we have to do that work. As you said, there's a lot of work, there's a lot of healing that has to happen along the way, and we have to do this in a way that doesn't just become yet another case of mainstream culture telling Aboriginal people and communities what to do. We want like an active process led by Indigenous people around this issue, and an engagement with the communities that are doing the work, and help Aboriginal communities do this work too. So we're looking forward to that. I'm not going to tell you that we've got the plan all laid out, because if we did, that would be a big problem, because it actually has to be a collaborative effort, and with a large, in a large way driven by Indigenous people. Any other questions before we wrap up here? Okay, thanks for joining us. And if people have other questions, just
send them all to
email
Leslie.
us, send them along, and then Leslie will get back to you. She's our spokesperson. So thank you very much. And stay tuned again, October 29th, next Thursday. That's the big launch.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.